Well, after our playtest on Wednesday, today's Friday, and so I'm going to give another playtest with the changes that we made. And this will be a solo game, and I'll try to also kind of review the mechanics of the game. I've set the table up a little differently. In past ones, there's been a little clutter. This one's kind of more wide open, which I think is more in keeping with how the battles of the Jacobite Rebellion were fought. Here on the government left, there's a town up on a hill, and their flank is covered with walls. There's a brigade coming in column. The Loyalist Highlanders are here on the flank defending. And then the center is defended by two brigades of regulars with the cavalry here on the right flank. And then the Highlanders on the opposite flank prepared to attack. And so I'm going to fight the first turn and kind of do a turn-by-turn account and hopefully have a better understanding of the rules and see how our new adaptations are working out. Okay, let's move on to turn one. Turn one. The government cavalry advanced forward, as did the Highlander cavalry. That's Lord Murray's clans coming forward. At the beginning of the turn, once a card is drawn, the commanding officer rolls 2 dice, and that determines how many actions they get. And in this case, just about everybody got only 1 action. So the movement was fairly limited. The smoke or the cotton by the cannons means that they have fired, and but they only got 1 action, so they're unloaded. That's what the smoke means. And the government guns took out 2 casualties on that column right there. But other than that, and I think there was the Jacobite got lucky and hit this cavalry unit, inflicting 1 unit on them. So all in all, it wasn't a lot happening, but the first blood went to the government forces. Ogilvy's Lowlanders are advancing on the flank here, and Wolfe's brigade is coming up into the town to be a more centralized position. Stapleton's French regulars there rolled a 12. So if you roll an 11 or 12 unmodified, you don't get to do anything, and your turn stops right then and there for that particular brigade. So let's move on to turn 2. Turn 2 was very eventful. Over here on the government right flank, the Jacobite cavalry got the initiative first and charged, and were able to drive back these dragoons, who were then in the next activation of Murray's Highlanders were charged again, so they suffered pretty heavily. Over here we have a deadlock. It's been a draw twice in a row now, light casualties. And then his reserve regiment has formed into line. Murray's men were able to advance significantly. They got 3 actions, so they could go up to 24 inches. So they're on the crest of the hill ready to potentially attack. Drummond's men only got 1 more activation, so they were only able to go 8 inches. The most significant event, the Duke of Perth's MacDonald clans were able to move 2 bounds, which is 16 inches. So they're within charge range now of the Duke of John Colmendally's line. But unfortunately for them, Colmendally rolled and he got 3 activations, meaning that he could fire, reload, and then fire a second time. So you can see the devastation. 4 stands were lost between these 3 clans. So unless they get the first initiative and are able to charge, it's going to be really a bad situation for them. Then Stapleton's men made up for their timidity last turn and were able to move 2 turns, and Ogilvy's men are deploying there. And then Wolfe deployed his battery here in the town to add some more weight. So things on the government right flank are not looking good. You can see the mass of men coming, and so we'll see what happens there. Turn 3 was quite eventful. On the government left here, Stapleton's men were only able to get 1 activation, so they moved up. Ogilvy's men were able to fire a volley and inflicted 1 casualty on each of the units there. Ogilvy's men were able to return the fire, but only had 1 activation, and they didn't do any damage whatsoever. Wolfe's battery here did inflict a casualty on the wild geese, and that was about it. Now, what here in the center, Perth's card came up first, which was awesome because he had caught Comendely's line unloaded and was all prepared to charge. So when he rolled for his activations, he rolled a 12, meaning he could do nothing whatsoever. And then Comendely's card came up, and he was only able to roll 1 activation. So basically, he's completely reloaded now. John Roy Stewart's men only got 1 activation, so they're moving up slowly behind. The real decisive action was George Murray's men got 2 activations, and so that put them able to charge the flank here. Comendely's regiment of foot held that line. They rolled to see if they could fire a volley. As they were coming in, they rolled a 2, meaning they were not able to. And so the overwhelming numbers and the advantage that the Scots have charging gave them a bonus. And they won by 5, meaning that the regiment was picked up. So they are now on the flank of the government center and poised to do a lot of damage. So unless it'll really determine whose card comes up first. Drummond's Atoll Brigade did nothing. They just sat there. And over on this flank, Ligoniers' dragoons are getting the best of the Jacobite cavalry, but one of his regiments has been destroyed by a charge of Lowlanders. So turn 3, very, very eventful. And we'll see what happens in turn 4. Turn 4 was another very amazing turn. Lots of fun. On this flank, it's going fairly well. It's kind of static. Ogilvy's got 3 initiatives, so he has fired. They didn't inflict any damage, and then Campbell's men just got 1 initiative, so they were only able to reload. They were able to fire a blast of canister in the Écossois, but only inflicted 1 casualty. So that's what happened here. Then on this flank, once again, Comendely got 3 actions. Perth was pulled first, but he rolled an 11, which means he couldn't do anything. So they basically took a lot of casualties. So you can see just how his 3 regiments of MacDonald's have just been torn apart there. And they also got some damage on John Roy Stewart's men coming up in preparation. But he was able to turn and fire at Murray's men. Murray's men charged and won, I think, 7-0 or 7-1. So that was overwhelming. So Comendely's regiment was picked up. And then for the officer, they had to roll for Comendely, who was attached or within 3 inches. He rolled a 12, so he was killed. This clan broke through and was able to charge into the flank of This regiment, which remarkably, despite being charged to the flank, won. And these guys were able to go up 9 inches in a follow-up and charge the battery, but only 1 by 1 there. So the battery was able to limber up and pull out with 1 casualty. The Athol Brigade is just lumbering along, just got 1 turn, so they're kind of ambling up here. And then on the cavalry, the Stuarts have done fairly well, but the attrition is really taking a toll. So they're getting worn down, and so is the government cavalry. So things are kind of winding down over here on this flank. But the Highlanders are just doing tremendous damage here. Colonel Wolfe is trying to get 2 of his regiments over here to shore things up. But this next turn will be very, very critical. The Duke of Perth is going to try to fall back, if at all possible. John Roy Stuart is going to charge, and we'll see if Stapleton can get his men to do a little bit more effective damage in their advance. Okay, on to turn 5. Turn 5. Stapleton advanced his elite brigade up. He got 3 actions, so he could move up. He fired and reloaded, but all that fire really didn't do a lot of damage. Ogilvy basically got just 1 action this turn, so he moved up a little bit. Campbell's men fired. They only had 1 turn, 1 action. So, and they didn't hit anything at all. Wolfe, his battery up here, was able to fire at that column, but only inflicted 1 casualty. And then he's got 2 of his regiments coming here to solidify the flank. General Husk has taken over Colmendally's brigade. They withstood a charge in the flank, lost by 1, so they pulled back. And then LaSalle's men, these guys have fought to the draw. It looks like Camerons of Lochiel are losing steam. The Athol Brigade, again, just 1 action, moved 1 more turn. Murray did get his battery to move up and unlimber. So LaSalle has basically turned his regiments to face the flank here. Bonnie Prince Charles is not moving very rapidly. The Duke of Perth got 3 activations, so he was able to pull his ruined brigade back to the road, and so he's kind of done for the day. And then over on the flank, the cavalry continued to fight it out, and just whittling each other down and just trying to keep one from the other to gallivanting free around the table. So turn 5, it looks like the government forces are beginning to solidify their line, but we'll see, because the Scots still have 2 pretty much unblooded brigades ready to do damage. So we'll see what happens in turn 6. Turn 6 was very, very active. The Scots continued to try to pressure the flank of the government forces. The government, though, is stubborn. They should have lost a lot of these engagements, but managed to lose by 1 and just kind of pull back. Over here, John Roy Stewart finally got his men in, charged, but you can see those front clans are decimated, almost down to half strength. So that's a challenge. And the line is folding back on itself. One remarkable situation is the Wild Geese charged this unit of Lowlanders, loyalists, and it was a tie. So, and then The Ekaswa came up and fired a volley and just basically did very little damage. Over here, Ogilvy's men came up and fired and just did just a little bit of damage. I think inflicted 1 or 2 casualties on these units here. So, but their rolls were both bad. I mean, each one only got 1 activation, so that doesn't give them a lot of options, a lot of flexibility. And so I think here on this Montrose, or the militia is holding its own, remarkably. And I don't know how much further the Atoll Brigade finally got in, charged, but only 1 by 1, so they were kind of stopped cold. And Murray's Highlanders there's 1 unit that's unscathed, but the other 2 are pretty much done. So turn 6 is in the books. Bonnie Prince Charles finally got a roll where he could kind of move up and get into the action. We'll see what happens there. So we'll move on to turn 7. Turn 7. A lot of brigades rolled to where they either had only just 1 activation or no activations at all. That was true of LaSalle, of Wolfe and LaSalle. Husk decided to have one of his units charge, and they were able to kind of drive back some Highlanders over here. Lord Murray only got 1 activation, so he basically just reformed his troops. John Roy Stewart pulled back 2 of his shattered clans and then charged, leading the Stewart of Appin into this regiment of Wolfe's regiment. Wolfe's regiment surprisingly won the combat, drove back Stewart of Appin, and in the process, because he was attached, his role, John Roy Stewart, was killed in the action. So he's gone. The Wild Geese continued their melee and drove back the lowland unit there, and the Royal Ekaswa fired 2 volleys into the battery and didn't do anything. And then Ogilvy basically didn't get any activations, and the lowlanders there got 1 fired and did not inflict any damage. So turn 7 was rather uneventful, except for the tragic loss of John Roy Stewart. You can see that the Highland units are pretty much worn down. They're going to try to regroup, I think, and maybe make 1 more push. Government is pulling back their artillery, trying to reconsolidate their line. And so we'll move on to turn 8 now. Yet another very interesting turn. Stapleton's card was drawn first, and so he led the Wild Geese in a charge, drove back the militia unit in front of them, and started climbing up the hill. The Royal Ekaswa charged the battery and killed the crew. But in the midst of all the fighting and swords clashing, Stapleton was killed in combat. The Lord Ogilvy got 3 impulses and charged. The unit on the right was basically stopped, but the 2 units here were able to drive back the Argyle militia and force them off the wall. And then another unit has come up on the flank of those Highlanders there, so that's going to be tough for them. The problem now for Stapleton's men is that they're leaderless, and so then over on this flank, Roy Stewart was gone, and so Bonnie Prince Charles came up and took command of that brigade and pulled them back. And John Drummond, his men charged into the fray here, and basically were not able to drive back. They were basically tied, so that'll go another round of melee. And then Murray's men, Murray attached himself to this regiment here. These two charged into this line, drove them back. This was a tie, and now Lord Murray is in hors de combat, so he's gone. So valiant and heroic, but the net result is that the Scots are now without a lot of leaders, and will begin to have to start to withdraw and pull back. So we'll fight one more turn to see if Ogilvy can really turn things over, but as of right now, it's not looking good for the Scots just because of all the loss of leaders that they've suffered. So let's move on to the next turn. I think I'm going to call the game here. The British, or the government forces, were able to hold on to the village, but just barely. The Scots were valiant. Ogilvy's units charged again, but basically were fought to a draw. Bonnie Prince Charlie came over and attached himself to Stapleton's men and began to pull them back. Some murderous volleys over here. Wolfe's regiment and stood toe-to-toe. And then over on this flank, things have stabilized considerably. The guns have been deployed. The line has been reestablished and reinforced. The Highlanders are beginning to pull back. And so you can see there's General Husk to command of Cholmondeley's men, General Wolfe. And so very formidable line. The Scots have been pretty severely battered. And so they did cut the road over here, which was one of the conditions what they were trying to do. To get an overwhelming victory, the government forces needed to hold this entire line, but their flank was turned fairly early in the game. You can see the carnage here where that took place. But then the resilience, they kind of came back and held tight, reformed, and but their ranks are pretty depleted. And but the mechanics I just thought worked really well. I like the idea of a commander being able to attach himself. That would add an extra die to their charge, but they get a +1 to their risk factor in being hit. And I think 3 or 4 of the generals were hors de combat, so it's a risk. And as the units get worn down, the less likely they are to be able to win melees. So anyway, really had a fun time today doing this. I think the rules are getting to just about the finishing point. And anyway, please leave me your comments if you have any questions or things that I could elaborate on a little bit better on. But just really, really had fun today doing this. And now it's kind of getting back to reality tomorrow, but it was fun while it lasted. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Have a very happy New Year, and God bless us all.